Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel discussion about the making of Anna Nicole. And it'll keep the five of us occupied for that suspenseful night between the dress rehearsal yesterday and the opening night tomorrow. Creating brand new operas is simply one of the most exciting things an opera company can do. Maybe pushing the boundaries, exploring new territory, moving the art form forward, throwing out new challenges to the audience. And the making of any new opera is a long and complicated process. It's one of the most complex art forms, drawing together the widest number of collaborators. And we'll be looking tonight at how this one happened, with exactly the right people to tell you how this work and its production were created. So please meet in order. This is the composer, Mark-Anthony Turnage. Then we have the librettist, Richard Thomas, the director, Richard Jones, and the choreographer, Aletta Collins. I'm going to talk to each of them about their particular involvement in this opera and hopefully get them talking among themselves. You know, during these long rehearsal periods, you're so busy just getting the show on, you don't have time to actually just sit down and talk about it among yourselves. So let's hope that some of that happens. I hope they'll chip in and contribute whenever they feel the urge. And as you've heard, at the end we'll have time for taking questions. So if you want to know how to make false boobs, or indeed anything else of any of the panellists, your time will come. Now, the world premiere of Anna Nicole took place in London 2.5 years ago at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, and that's where I'm from. And the production that BAM is presenting from tomorrow is that self-same Covent Garden one, but recast with different singers, dancers, actors, and the chorus and orchestra of New York City Opera, and that'll be the American premiere of the opera. So the opera was born in London, is now about to open here, and in between, earlier this year, there was another different production of it in Germany, staged by the Opera House in Dortmund. So this is a new opera that's beginning to make its way in the world, and it's not just lodged where it began. First performances of new operas are not uncommon these days, but getting second and subsequent ones is, of course, what you hope for a new creation. So it started with an opera house in 2007, the Royal Opera, commissioning a composer, Mark-Anthony Turnage, to write a new opera to be performed in 2011. And that boils really down to me ringing Mark and saying, what about it? And it took about a year, I think, of going through subjects. Finding the possible subject was the hardest thing. We gave you pretty free range. So what was your process of trying to think what the subject should be?
It's very hard, actually. In fact, I'm going through that process again because I'm writing another one for Covent Garden in 2020, and the idea of getting a subject is just almost impossible. And I think a lot of times I see operas are put on, I think, I wonder why that idea attracted them. It sounds pretty cruel, but I think a lot, it's to find something that's really, I mean, you have to work on it for at least 2 or 3 years, and something that's going to sustain your interest is just really hard. And so I think that I look all the time. I look in bookshops, but often that isn't the right way to look for them. But for plays and things, and so it's a really laborious process.
Your two previous operas were both plays, weren't they?
Yes, they
existing
were.
Plays.
Yeah.
But this time, I don't know. You almost a year. I think we had different ideas, and you read different plays and said, "Nah, this isn't going to do it." I think the one condition that we'd kind of laid down was that we wanted it to be humorous. We wanted a contemporary subject. We wanted something that had humour in it, and that would use your love for jazz. Because Tony Pappano, who was going to conduct it, is also a jazz man, and they really wanted to work with somebody who would do jazz and wouldn't do something that was deadly serious. We'd just done the Minotaur by Harrison Birtwistle. Before that, we'd done Sophie's Choice. We'd had some really serious, wonderful, but heavyweight operas. And Tony Pappano, who was going to conduct this piece, said, "Give me something that's got some humour in it this time."
The trouble is when people tell you what to do, you tend to. I then looked at very miserable subjects. I thought, sod that, I don't really necessarily want to do what they're asking me. But so in a sense, I was looking. I mean, I was just looking for anything. But I was quite attracted to the idea of comedy, but I didn't know how to do it. And I felt that in my previous opera, Silver Tassi, that the comedy things didn't really work that well. And so I didn't know really how to do it. So I was sort of splashing around, really not knowing what to do. Really, it was really hard. It was a funny process. It always is.
And then you met.
Yeah, well, me and Richard were on a panel for composers. I think it was a BBC panel, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I obviously knew all about Richard because I knew I hadn't seen it live, but I obviously knew about Jerry Springer, the opera, and I really liked him. He sat next to me actually on the panel. And I just thought, oh, he's a really nice guy. I don't know why I thought you weren't going to be. That's a bit interesting, but there we go. But so and we just hit it off, and then we didn't even talk about working together. We sort of kept meeting up just socially as friends. And I think one night when I'd had quite a few drinks, I plucked up the courage in my local pub and said, would you like, would you do a libretto? Can we work together? And he immediately said yes. And so that was it, really. And I remember actually talking, because I think Richard Jones was on board by then as well. Or
We'd
maybe,
already said from the beginning that Richard Jones was going to be the director.
And Richard actually said we ought to meet at least once a week and just brainstorm ideas, which is what we did, actually.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And so I don't know if you talked about this before, but I think funny enough, there were obviously different things on each list, but Anna Nicole was the first thing that was on both of our lists.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Is that right?
Yeah, I had a list of...
She'd recently died just then, of course, didn't she?
Yeah.
So,
I had a list of one, and that was Anna Nicole. What was your list?
yeah.
Well, I think we had more than that, but we've forgotten.
Yeah.
There was a
Two,
couple.
but I have a completely...
There must have been plan Bs, surely. There must have been.
There was a wild party for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a couple of things, but it would never... Yeah.
And we were going to do Reykjavik, the opera. Do you remember that?
It's
not a bad idea, actually.
Funny enough, I wasn't so keen on that. Yeah.
So you started on all sorts of drafts of this.
Some
I mean,
terrible
ideas were
drafts.
flowing. You did this weekly brainstorming. You came into the Royal Opera House quite often and showed us material, some of which made us pretty nervous.
Well, I remember one of the first ideas was, actually, Tony Pappano really liked this idea, is that we had two old guys like in the Muppets, and they sat in a box, and they commented on. But actually, I remember Richard Jones really didn't like this idea at all.
Hated
it. So that was fair enough, because that was one of the first ideas.
They were basically two guys, and they were just looking down on the opera and just absolutely tearing the opera, saying how disgusting they thought it was and what a boring medium it was, and how and just listing how many other things they could be doing at that moment other than watching this complete pile of excrescent doll, drowning in the pools of their own tedium.
Yeah, and the problem with that is...
someone didn't find it funny.
The trouble with that is you'd have to keep it going for the whole opera,
Yeah,
so that was very hard. But I must say
idea.
that when Richard, because obviously Richard's a composer as well, and so when he's writing for himself, this is what we talked about actually. You write and you edit as you go along, and this is the thing. Was what happened at the beginning is I liked the words so much that Richard was writing that I just set everything, which I don't usually do, but usually I edit myself, or have a librettist doing that. So there was, so I would say actually, if we added up the minutes of music that I've cut out, it's probably about an hour of Anna Nicole that's been cut.
Yeah, I was horrified when using all the lines. I thought, no, you don't. No, you got to get rid of the bad bits, but
did any of that cut stuff get used? Because you wrote an orchestra piece called Texan Tenebrae.
No, well, I have used little bits, but actually a lot of it hasn't because it was so part of the opera. I did use an orchestral. The fact that there's an interlude in Act 2 of Anna Nicole, which is basically Texan Tenebrae. So it's an orchestral piece. So really, that is that. So there were a couple of things. We had a court scene, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which I used the whole of that for the last minute of my cello. I've written a cello concerto. And I've written a couple other little things, So some things were usable, but a lot of it wasn't. So, but that's what it's like. That's what especially if you work in musicals and not so much in opera, but if it doesn't work and it's not theatrically, it doesn't work theatrically, then you just get rid of it if it gets in the way. So it was quite laborious.
It was especially in comedy. I mean, I come from a comedy background from way back when, and in the sort of comedy culture, you'd always try stuff out before you take it on the road, and that's still, it would be unthinkable to, create a comic show or whatever, go on tour, without trying the stuff in small clubs, and you're cutting out maybe at least 30 to 40%. It would be 30-40% failure rates. That's kind of guaranteed, even on the really top guys. And I remember when I did the first draft of Act 1 and you set music to it, I remember listening to it. I said to you, I've given you a pile of shit and you've returned the favour. And it was great, because I mean, a lot of composers, classical composers, would not ever rewrite. It's unthinkable. And normally the routine is, I write the libretto, there you go, I'll see you on opening night. But I was rarely more than 2 or 3 scenes ahead of you. I had a kind of arc going, but I was, just kind of exploring. That was great. That gave us a lot of, it was a truly organic thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very unique thing. People say, it's often quite a cliche to say that, but it was quite a unique relationship.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that the big mistake a lot of collaborators in opera do is that they barely meet.
Yeah.
And Rich and I were at least sometimes twice a week. I mean, not every week, but then we'd have times where it would be a month when I'd write more, but there'd be times when it was very intense, and we'd just hone it down. And I didn't orchestrate a note until we'd finished the short score. So basically, the whole thing was written in short score first, and then I orchestrated, because and that really worked with all the timings of the jokes and stuff. It was, I mean, I didn't know about that, and Richard would say, if that's 1 beat or 2 beats longer, it's funnier, and I would go with that because I trusted his thing about, because that's the one thing I didn't know about. I just really found that hard. So it was a true collaboration in that way, and of course we had the workshops as well, which really helped.
Yeah, tell us about those. It was you who wanted those, actually, wasn't it? Because you had them before when you did.
I did Silver Tassia in English National Opera, and also Richard, coming from that background, we were both, I was sort of used to it a little bit. Certainly, I did it also with orchestral music, but Richard really, that's the whole point about, when you're writing musicals. I mean,
I definitely wouldn't have done it if we didn't have the workshops, because this whole thing in opera, you get like a dress rehearsal, then it's opening night. It's insane. I mean, there's no. I mean, unlike music theatre, you have like months and months of previews. I mean, I certainly believe that the show is pretty much in the bag, or should be in the bag, by day 1 of rehearsals, and I don't think there are that many huge changes you can make to a show. However, you can certainly hone it, see where the laughs lie, improve a thing. But here, there was no time at all. So we said to the Royal Operas, these are workshops, 4 workshops over 2 years. But I said to Mark, these are previews, and we used to film them and we'd watch them at home. And I remember, interestingly enough, the last one we did, I thought it went really well. I thought, oh great, we've really landed the show. And I went home, I watched it, and I fell asleep. I called Mark. I said to Mark, I fell asleep. What about you? He said, yeah, I fell asleep too. I said, that's a bad sign. And so we took, and there was this big court scene there, which was about 8 or 10 minutes long. And so we just, got the scissors out and chucked it out. So now all the dramaturgical stuff in that 8-minute scene is now summed up in 2 sentences in the Larry King scene, which basically covers this period of 10 years of litigation where Anna Nicole and the dead billionaire's family are suing each other in various courts across the country. That 10-year period is condensed into a 3-minute. So there's a lot of, if you notice that, if you see the show and you notice that in Act 2, that was a lot of work. But it was good, so it was better for it.
At the end of that workshop process, I think we all learned a lot, and Tony Pappano came to those and heard them, because he was the guy who was going to conduct it.
It's great.
Also, he was a bit the arbiter of taste in terms of the language used.
I remember one of our first meetings, it was an hour and 15, and an hour and 5 minutes was talking about the bad language.
Yes.
There was a lovely meeting where finally there's Elaine and Tony there, and Elaine said, look, Richard, you've got to really stop putting these swear words. And I said, oh, for goodness sake, Elaine, there's only 17 fucks. And you said, there are 25, I've counted them. And I said, rumbled. But I mean, I'm from a kind of, I love The Wired, and I love The Soprano, I love American TV culture. It's to the top rung. It's so beautifully profanity laden, but in a kind of good way. And I think in our show, where the swear words are entirely appropriate for the character and the scene. I mean, I don't think people are shocked by swear words. It's boring. In fact, so I think there's one use of the C -- word, but it's hyphenated with hungry, And so that slightly diminishes the violence of it, and it's super perfect. It's my favourite hyphen in the show.
And also we had this thing where I think Richard had this, I don't know if Dennis Potter's known in America, but he had this theory that at the beginning of the, that you do with the BBC is the chuck of many swear words in, so that when you're taking them out, it looks like you're compromising.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry.
so that's what we did.
Yeah.
We put more in, and then we knew we could get back to what we wanted. Sorry, that sounds terrible now.
The secret's out.
Oh, sorry.
Did you have a sort of a gleeful feeling that you were presenting the Royal Opera House with some material that was going to represent a kind of real clash of cultures? Was there a feeling
I did, but it was pure. In hindsight, it was puerile. But
Yeah.
I definitely did at the beginning. But I think I wasn't quite ready for the total acceptance of it all. So I was expecting a bit more of a fight, and also, but it was such a shock to work with such world-class kind of musical athletes. It was, and the director, of course. I mean, I've known Richard's stuff for 25 years. He hates it when I say this, and I've been a massive fan. So when I knew he was on board, I just wrote the show that I knew he would direct, because you just felt it was like. And I wrote it on a film script actually, because it was like with Richard, you can just go anywhere. Cut to Houston. Cut to 15 years later. Cut to a pole dancing club. Cut to the champagne room. And then just knew he'd work it out. But so that gave a great freedom for me to write. Thanks, baby.
So okay, Richard, you're being dragged in here. So while the work is growing, so too is the physical production as part of the process. And you chose your team. You wanted Miriam Buter to design the scenery, Nikki Gillibrand, the costumes, Mimi Sherin, the lights, and Aletta Collins as choreographer. Those happen to be all women. Is there anything special about that? I mean, did you realise you were choosing an all-girl team?
No. I didn't.
I just told you something you hadn't realised before.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I don't feel girled out or anything like that, but yeah.
Okay. Well, okay.
We live beyond gender in the Anna Nicole show.
So,
I mean, there wasn't a connection between.
You didn't think this is a subject that needs some kind of feminine.
No, not at all. No.
Okay, fine. No. Okay, so tell us how you chose to stage the opera that you received from the composer and librettist. What sort of setting did you decide to go for?
Well, set it in the 90s when the story's set, and I got scripts from them, so. I didn't know anything about her, and it's the same 9 books, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every book's the same.
Yeah.
So I read all of those, and I watched the Anna Nicole show a lot, twice, which is a bit punitive.
Yeah.
We had it in here. Actually, this is where we rehearsed, and we were showing, for the benefit of the cast, these tapes from the Anna Nicole show, and they were all absolutely mesmerised by this material. Anyway, carry on.
I drew quite a lot. I mean, I've got a bit of a facility, I think, for knowing how to get from A to B. So I could sort of draw a bit, and then I'd take those drawings to the designers, and generally they found those drawings a bit risible. So they sort of
so they threw those away.
Yeah. And then while all that was going on, we talked to Aletta a bit, and yeah.
Can I ask, was there anything you were worried about at any point? Sorry, I don't mean to jump in. I mean, because was there? We don't. It's all.
I was worried about that thing about the 2 old men. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we got rid of that.
Yeah, you got rid of that. Well, you cut it.
Yeah.
And the gherkin. Remember the gherkin scene?
No.
It's called the, what do you call a gherkin in a pickle? There's a big pickle scene. You said to me, I gave it to you, and I remember outside the opera house, I said, what do you think? I thought it was really good. You said, it sounds like some mad acid trip, you know.
I don't remember that.
Oh, right. Maybe you were on the acid trip and you'd read it.
But Richard, I mean, how do you go about devising your production? How does the process start?
I can't say any other way than reading a lot around the subject, and then I quite like taking about 3 or 4 days where I think I'll draw as much as I can, and I'll draw pictures of where I think people are, or what the acting qualities are, or what I think it looks like, and then I don't like going to a design meeting unless I've got something to bring to it. So generally that's how it was, yeah.
And in this case, of course, you didn't have any music. I mean, this is not something where you can go to the library and get out the records and listen to it.
Well, there was a bit of music, Elaine, because there were the tapes from the workshops.
So that's what you used as your...
Yeah, and I can remember piecing it together. I can remember there was an orchestral reading, and I can remember working out what the lines were in the wedding at the end of the first half, and that was very helpful to hear the orchestral colours, yeah, as opposed to... And I can play a bit myself.
But it is a much harder process, isn't it, when it's a new opera, when it's not an existing opera?
This felt much more concrete than some things I've done, new plays or new operas. Yeah, it felt much more immediate, really. And
what you did, and I don't know how much discussion there was with Richard, because Richard wrote lots of very detailed descriptions of what he thought was going to be seen on the stage, and you went and changed all that, so that even the very first performance of this opera is not what he imagined would happen.
Can I say why I did that initially? It was because when I was writing it, I'm imagining, because I write compose as well, I was thinking, well, I want things to happen and time to pass, and so it's also a sign to Mark when, you know, you do a detailed thing of something happening, that's a cue for him to write some music to cover it, basically. So it's that.
I think I was true to the spirit of the stage directions, but never to the letter, and I think that's what directors should do.
No, but what was brilliant is that you decided that the chorus, we're all going to be reporters.
Yeah, that was a brilliant idea. I wish I'd had that idea.
You came up with some just amazing ideas. So from the beginning, it was a mixture of a collaboration with you who had been in from the very beginning, really, of this.
That was a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Much better than my shoot.
And the wonderful images that we showed you some pictures before, and you might have noticed that towards the end there was a scene which there's a lot of cameras all over the place, and this kind of the general feeling that the cameras, the intrusiveness in the life of Anna Nicole is, you know, she's completely taken over by the cameras in the end. That was
He's
a really good
brilliant.
idea.
You should have seen his Annie get your gun.
Oh, you say that to all the boys.
You should have seen his Annie get your gun. That was brilliant.
So then tell us, what's the process by which you rehearse this? You get into the studio in here with a cast in front of you, and how do you do it?
I think it depends on the amount of time you've got. If you've got a lot of time, you can do a lot of work with the actors on their backstory. You can do a lot about acting qualities or atmospheres before they even take to the floor. You can ask them to generate material. If you have a lot of time, you can work like that. If you don't, which was the case in BAM, you, I suppose, slightly recapitulate upon what you think was the best of what happened in London and try and sense what they're good at generating. And in this American cast, there are some extremely creative people who've come up with different stuff, actually, which is very good. But I think how you go about a show depends upon how much time you've got. I mean, it's different if you do. I think if you do a play, you usually have much more time because it's not so expensive, so you can do more work around the table. Usually with an opera, it's often something I think that you have to carry around in your head and communicate as assiduously as possible as you can to singers, because usually, even in Europe, there's less time for opera, isn't there?
Do you have any problems knowing that there are living people being shown on stage, however much this is a sort of fantasy?
Well, there's lots of pieces based upon lives of people who've lived, aren't they? And no, I don't at all, no. And I don't, but I think my main worry was that she was belittled in any way, and I think entirely the opposite is true. I think you know, she's not degraded or belittled by what they've done, and so yes, I'm fine with that.
What sort of theatre do you think it is that's being created here? Is it? I mean, the press sort of loved talking about what was this. You know, they found it something strange and new in a way.
Well, they didn't talk about it as political theatre, which surprised me. And well, we were just talking about this in relation to the Metropolitan Opera putting out a statement saying recently that, in relation to their production of Jan Onegin, that their aims are not aesthetic, their aims are not political, their aims are only aesthetic. And I think all theatre is political, isn't it? And I think this is a vividly political piece in that you see somebody who's, well, quite an ordinary woman and who's trying to do the best for her child, and she ends up being seduced by hedonism, and she ends up being seduced by making herself a professional clown for the edification of us all. And I think that's so I think this piece has got a big moral centre as well as being very entertaining. And I think that kind of theatre usually gives me personally a lot of energy. And I'm aware when I watch this or rehearse it, well, Aletta was saying that the other day, I've always got quite a lot of energy for this, and I've not peaked with it. And I can imagine keeping going with it. And I think that's because it has a very strong moral centre, actually. I think it's... I think it's a very good thing to have put into the world.
I think this is why we were attracted to the story at the Royal Opera House. It's a parable. It's not just about this one woman. Her story is a much more universal one. And I mean, she joins, as far as I'm concerned, the opera gallery of the other sad ladies that opera consists of. The Violettas and the Manons and the Carmens. And I think she really has joined that kind of gallery of heroines whose fate that we can all sort of sympathise with. Can I ask you something about your music? What are the main musical influences that we hear in
Well, I've always been a fan from my teens, really, of American music, particularly jazz. And so when Tony Pappano was talking about that, it was something that I'd never really incorporated. There's a little bit in my first opera, Greek. There's a bit of Charles Mingus, I suppose, influence. And certainly Silver Tassi was almost none. So I'd never really... and in fact, I've never really worked with jazz players in the orchestra. I knew that I wanted a certain amount of the jazz-tinged music. And I remember when we were talking about the styles of orchestra, actually, which is quite key, because I remember seeing, funny enough, we talk about Burt Russell's Minotaur, which was just before, I think it was a commission before, before Anna Nicole. I'd seen quite a lot of the orchestra overspilling into the boxes and stuff, which is fine, but I was determined that wasn't going to happen. I was going to use a Puccini-sized orchestra with a jazz trio, and there's two saxes as well, which is the only extra thing. So, but also, I think I asked for Pete Erskine, this great drummer that I'd worked with on many occasions, because I felt that he would drive certainly the sort of the more jazzy elements. He would be just perfect for it, and I think that was agreed, and that was one of the things I really wanted to do. So I knew I had certain key people on board, and as I said, because American music is so close to me, in a sense, and has been for a long time, that in a way it was quite a joy to work in. I mean, I didn't know so much about Broadway, and I think there are certain things that connected with musicals, partly also because of the way that Richard writes, so I knew that was there, although I know less about it. But I knew that there was some jazz element would be part of it, so that was a key thing. Although, I wasn't working with Broadway singers or jazz singers, it was going to be with, operatic singers, but I was trying to make it sort of seamless and not like, this is now a jazz bit and this is now a operatic. So I was trying to make the whole thing a bit of a blend. So that's what I tried to do. And in many ways that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. The use of the jazz trio is really terrific, because they become the kind of backbone, the rhythmic backbone of the orchestra, don't they?
Yeah. And the other thing that in England, and which has got, because I'd been a good friend of, this sounds like name dropping now, but he's actually the only person I know outside of classical and jazz is John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, because he's actually from a classical background, and I met him completely from a classical situation, not because it's after he retired from, after Led Zeppelin split up. And I always said to him for years, I'd really like to collaborate with you, but nothing really was appropriate. And then suddenly I said, would you like to play in the opera? And he agreed. And so I had this amazing sort of trio, really, a guitarist as well called John Paracelli, and we had this. So that was again. I think, of course, you can't have those people every time. We've got Peter Erskine in this production, by the way, which is great. We haven't got John Paul Jones. But the thing is that I think I got everybody I wanted. I wanted Ava Maria Westbrook because I'd seen her and was really keen. And it was great that she was on board earlier on. So I knew the voice types. And Jerry Finley, who did the original Howard Stern, and so it sort of makes you feel, it's like, I don't know if it's a comfort zone, because I don't think any of this was comfortable, but I think if you've got certain voice types or singers or musicians that you love and you feel comfortable with, and in a way, when you communicate with them, there's like a shorthand because you've worked them so much. I think it was really nice for me to sit down and think, you know, I'm not just writing for a soprano, I'm writing for Ava Maria Westbrook and various people.
And because they're jazz musicians, does that mean there's a certain improvisatory thing in what they do?
Well, that's a tricky one because, of course, you know, it's very tightly organised, the opera. I mean, but what I would say is that in Pete Erskine's part, again, because I work with him so much, the drum part and, you know, the rhythmic stuff, he drives a lot of it, is very free in the sense that I give him, you know, very basic things. I trust him because he's such a tasteful player. He wouldn't do anything tasteless or loud, actually. There's a drummer, one of the few drummers who can play dynamics. You know, he can actually play softly. And I basically wrote a very sort of skeletal part, really like a big band part, and the big bits. You know, there's a lap dancing scene where it's like a big band, you know, part. So his part is very free. And the rest is sort of they're more written down, but certainly in the drum part, it's very free.
This very strong rhythmic element, of course, means that there's wonderful opportunities for dance in this opera. Sorry to keep you waiting so long, Aletta, but you know, your contribution is absolutely fantastic. And there is so much action and movement in this show. And I got the impression when we were watching the rehearsals growing when we first did it at Covent Garden that you were all the time adding new things. New opportunities for dance seemed to be presenting themselves. So it wasn't just like the lap dancing scene or whatever. You seem to be inventing new movement all the time. Is that what happens?
Yes, I mean, the opera doesn't have the Act 3 ballet. There isn't a long dance sequence.
No, it has the Act 3
In fact, that's what's rather wonderful about it, that it moves, it's so lean and moves so quickly through the different episodes, that it was about finding within it movement which helped us do that. So there isn't any kind of fantasy dancing in it or just dance breaks. We were sort of really looking at a way of sort of establishing a language. So we knew exactly where we were. We're in a doctor's room, and that any of the dancing or movement helps define what kind of place we're in. And then suddenly we're in a club and what that club's like, and trying to find a way of setting it up very quickly, because actually there's very few bars where there's not, you know, a character or a moment happening. As I say, it moves very quickly. I remember right at the beginning, because I don't read music, and so these tapes from the workshops were really precious. I said, "Have you got one, Richard?" And he did have one. So he brought this tape round, and it was really fuzzy to hear, but it was the chorus singing the opening of the show. And we were in my living room, and Richard said, "You know, I think we really need to find the way they move, because they should always move in unison." And Richard's a brilliant choreographer, so it was really good fun working that out together. And then from that, I sort of felt like I had enough information to then move on and as you say, start filling in more and pushing it further, because we'd had that first moment together. And a lot of the choreography seemed to work like that once we'd done a little bit of work together, or you'd seen something, even if it was just the beginning of an idea, and said, no, that's the right way to go. It was then an exciting journey to fill that out and let it grow. And we've still been putting new things in. Even for the dress rehearsal yesterday, there were still little movements or little moments that we were still kind of crafting. So I think the whole thing almost has a feeling of being choreographed. So that doesn't necessarily mean dancing, if you know what I mean. So, yeah.
Sorry.
Cirque du Soleil.
Be facetious.
But you were a dancer yourself, weren't you? You were in contemporary dance. Yeah.
Yes, I was trained in London in contemporary dance, and all of our contemporary dance came from here. We didn't have any of our own. And there was a wonderful man who very early on, Martha Graham came to the Royal Opera House, and he was a fantastic man called Robin Howard, and he was a fighter bomber in the war, and had lost both his legs, but he was a very tall, incredible man. And he turned up at the Opera House and saw Martha Graham, and said, "This is so extraordinary. You've got to send me one of your dancers. I'll set up a dance school. I'll do whatever you want." Wow. And he sold 2 Rodin pieces. I remember because he had one left by the time I'd started training, and he sold that for young choreographers. He was an incredible man. Anyway, he begged Martha to please send somebody that could come and start dance in England. And she picked one of her lead dancers at the time, a man called Robert Cohan. And he came to London and just, in the 60s, blew everyone's mind. He looked fantastic, he had great big sort of knee-length silver boots and long hair, and brought this thing called contemporary dance. And I benefited from that. So 20-odd years later, I arrived at that school and studied in Graham. But I suppose something from that Graham thing, because a lot of her work is obviously very much narrative-led. It was about stories and about movement, expressing stories. And I suppose that's the one thing I took from that training. There's always this interest in telling stories. So the opportunity to work in opera, which I've been doing now for quite a long time, I've really enjoyed that challenge of working on a narrative with dance.
You also work, of course, with very different physical types. You've got the real dancers who are in the show, and you've got the opera singers who just really need to help it move. I mean, you give them a vocabulary of movement that they can use, don't you, as well? Yes, but
you know, honestly, all the singers in this company are amazing. And I'm not just saying that to be nice, but compared to the singers we had in England, I just think they're so different. I think, you know, cast of, it's pretty much, but I think only one European singer, it's an American cast, seem to have so much more sort of, I don't know, just their skills, and also just having a go, just literally throwing themselves into the dancing, that when we get into the party, it's rather extraordinary, these singers throwing themselves around brilliantly. And I remember when we did this with the chorus in London, you know, just getting some of them to lift their arms up at the same time was, you know, quite an event. The movement of doing it. What do you mean we have to do it again? We've done it once. But then the conversation of, and what am I doing when I'm doing that? It's like, oh, should we just not bother? And this time, the choruses are extraordinary, and they really want to get it right. And it'll be 30, how many chorus?
It's quite small.
43. We've got 34.
34. And they really want to be working together, and it's really tightly choreographed. I think they're fantastic. I genuinely don't know how we're going to translate that back on the English company next year, especially when they're smacking their bottoms. Explaining that to some of the members of the Royal Opera House might be take some time, anyway.
Okay. Richard, Thomas. Today I was reading some of the many wonderful articles that are out in the press and have been published over the last 2 or 3 days, particularly. And here's a quote from one of those articles that I hadn't heard you say this before. And you said, "I told Mark-Anthony, you're writing an opera, but I'm writing a musical. And we're going to put it in that atomic collider and send them in opposing directions and see what happens when they smash together."
Yeah, I mean,
do you remember saying that?
I was trying to be funny and fading at that point, but there was an element of truth about that. I mean, I was definitely bringing a sort of Broadway, and a West End sensibility to the piece. Yeah. So there's moments where it feels like you're getting a number, but I was kind of I was stealthily, sneakily trying to introduce some showbiz.
But the point is it an opera or is it a musical?
Well, I think
and what makes one and not the other?
Well, I think if you look at something like Gianni Schicchi or La Boheme, especially Gianni Schicchi, that's a classic musical. So the show stops. You got these 2 showstoppers, on Mio Caro. That's an incredible song. The story's pretty funny. I mean, the music's sensational. And La Boheme, 4 acts under 2 hours. It's pretty tight, very thematically rich. That's a very political piece, which I think people forget. It's about, but I mean, I remember when I was 16, I queued up overnight to see at the National with my twin sister. We sort of there was a cheap deal going on at the National Theatre for Guys and Dolls, and all tickets were like £2 or something, which is I don't know $5, right? And so there were about 300 people, queuing up overnight to buy these seats. And in the morning, the cast came up and they're sort of juggling and all sorts of stuff. In the evening, when the show went up, everybody sort of had this, you know, vigil to get the tickets. It was the most incredible night at the theatre I'd ever had, you know. And everything was encored. Even Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat had 5 encores. In fact, the singers and dancers were going, shut up, because we were just like this high. And I thought that was how all shows were. This was the first sort of, you know, West End show I'd seen, really. But that's always stayed with me. And I always knew then, I thought, I'm doomed to write shows. I mean, I didn't, but, you know, I thought I want to do this. And it, you know, I was only in my mid-30s, I started writing shows. And, but it was that, you know, and I think I've always wanted to, I think I learned such a lot from that, really. And I just wanted to get a bit of that in.
So let's just look back at after the London premiere, what happened then? I mean, it went down pretty well, but you wanted to make some changes afterwards, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. There's a couple of things that there was sort of a feeling that at the end there was. Well, we talked about it a lot. There was a slight. It's the thing we were talking about actually in Puccini, which works really well. There was something sort of slightly stunted emotionally. It wasn't quite. Actually, it's a matter of. It's not that many bars really. I think I've added about 16 bars to the whole. At the end, I've made the moments at the end of Virgie, Anna Nicole's mum, sings this aria, you know, which is sort of quite of regret, and it's quite sad, and that ended. It sort of ended too soon. I mean, you know, it literally is, I think, 8 bars longer. But there was a big sort of moment. It hits then musicals you call like a what's the word? We always talk about it.
Not the button.
The button.
No, the button. Like
sort of the button. Emotional button, which was sort of lacking, and it is funny because I've realised that by putting these bars in and adding sort of a big moment, it has really I think it's really improved the emotional, because you really have to feel for Anna Nicole, and I think, and also for the mum, and I think you do more, but it really wasn't that much music. I also extended the lap dance when she has a boob job. A big aria, which was only 1.5 minutes, and now it's 3 minutes. Yeah. And we also felt that was, you know, because the thing is, it's moving so fast with all the scenes moving. You know, we're talking about what Aletta was talking about. It really moves on very quickly. There needs to be occasionally a still moment, and I think this is one of the examples. And it doesn't go on for long enough, really. And I think you need these little focuses. I mean, there are the thing about the piece is that the real challenge was anyway to keep it light and funny for as long as possible. So the descent is more shocking. But so we didn't do very much really. I mean,
cut a bit at the opening chorus as well.
Oh yeah, that was too long.
Check of that. Yeah. And there were various little, got the scissors out, various other little bit points. So it's kind of, you know.
I mean, that was easy to cut than add. I mean, adding obviously is a nightmare, especially for the publisher, because you've got to add all this stuff in its orchestration. They're very happy with me.
So. And that was premiered. The new music was premiered in Dortmund. We all went along and heard
which was good because
which was good.
Yeah, because we could hear it for this production. Because actually, if we'd not liked it, we probably might have either changed it back or done a little bit more work. But fortunately for Boozies, we were pretty happy with that version.
I mean, also in a music theatre, if you were going to do a Broadway transfer, you'd be. I mean, it would be unthinkable not to revisit and make some changes. I mean, the classic. I mean, same as like when when Cabaret became a movie, they made some huge changes, which in fact was so effective. They had to then put the movie changes, back into the live show, to its detriment, I think personally. But it was good to get another chance at it, and I always tinker away until I'm thrown out the room. I did a show once, which was the Sydney Opera House, and I. It had been on in London. It was called Jerry Spring the Opera. We did it in London. We did it in Carnegie Hall and a few other places. And we went to Sydney Opera House. And there was this woman called Gail Edwards, who's quite a famous director down there. And we sat there. I'm there 5 weeks before opening. There's a chorus is there. Everybody's there. And she says, this is Richard. And I just want to say I'm the director. And the first rule of good direction is get the writer out the fucking room. And that was it. I was out for 5 weeks. Yeah. I thought she was joking. And I wasn't allowed in the room. There's not a lot of movies, I mean, it was... Yeah.
Your time here during the rehearsals has resulted in a few word changes, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The various bits and pieces that needed Americanizing.
I think Richard was keen to have,
There's a lot of word changes made. Yeah.
I think Richard was keen to have me here for, because it's a big deal, Broadway, a New York transfer.
Well, I was very anxious that everybody would hear it as an American piece and not a piece by a British writer. So yes, and quite a lot of changes have been made in the text here. Yeah.
Things like car park is now truck stop. Essential to the dramaturgy.
Yeah. Aircon has become
AC.
What else?
But I was right about the Yoko Ono joke. I was under a lot of pressure to change the Yoko Ono joke. I was right about Yoko Ono, which stays.
That's going to confuse everybody here, though, because I don't know how we're talking about.
I know. That'll draw them to the show.
So let's just move on a bit to this New York phase. What's been involved in recreating the opera here at BAM? Obviously, it was a big technical operation to adapt the scenery to the more limited stage conditions here. Has that been a problem, Richard? You know most about this. I mean, what needed to be done to make it work here?
It's a much smaller space, and the British stage manager has come over with a small amount of British crew, so that the American crew can take it over. But really, it's an entirely different show backstage, because there's so little space, isn't there? It's really extraordinary. Yeah.
There's very little wing space here. And whereas at Covent Garden there's this new wonderful stage, you press a button and things glide on and off. Here we've had to fly far more things, haven't we?
Yeah, lots of the trucks
things have had to be made smaller and flying, and it's very congested backstage. Actually, Joe Melilla was saying yesterday when he introduced the dress rehearsal that this is the biggest show they have ever had in here, which came as a bit of a surprise. You know, just the size of the company, the size of the scenery, the whole thing is the biggest that they've done. But the whole cast, as we've already touched on, is different here, except for one singer. That's the Sue Bickley who sings Virgie, Anna Nicole's mother, and Peter Erskine, the star drummer. He was in the original London. Otherwise, everyone is new. The actors, dancers, of course, the chorus, the orchestra of New York City Opera. Stephen Sloan, the conductor, is new, all new to the piece. So how does that feel when you've done the piece before and then you come in and there's a whole lot of different people doing the same roles? What's that sort of like?
Well, really exciting if they're as competent as this lot. Very exciting, yeah. And a lot more come from a Broadway background or musical theatre background in this cast than in London. In London, it was almost entirely a cast of opera singers, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, we decided to go for Broadway singers for some to bring to life really more of the small character roles. Yeah. We've got people like James Barber, Mary Testa, Christina Sajus. Mark, you came into the rehearsals at a point where we were doing full runs in here, and the orchestra just started rehearsing in the attic on the top floor. So we were a long way into it then. How did you feel hearing these very different voices doing your music?
I was a bit worried what you might think, because you weren't...
the composers coming, the composers.
Because you never know.
No, because somebody, for instance, Christina, who plays Blossom there,
who's the chief
extraordinary black singer who I adore her voice. I mean, the thing is, I've got I just, but in some ways, I enjoy her performance more than anything else in the show. I shouldn't just say that, but I do, because it's just I love soul music and I love gospel, and the fact she's on that stage singing I had to change some of the notes for it, but I just love the way she sings, and she's such a fantastic actress, and so it's so vivid for me. I mean, that is so that when she started singing, it's like, oh wow, this is incredible.
That was a good moment. Seeing your face.
But also people like James, who plays the Barber, who plays the dad. I mean, it's extraordinary, and they're really clear as well. Yeah. They're really focused, and that's exciting. I mean, it's a very different tradition, but because I think if it had been a carbon copy and it had been very operatic in the way. It would be less interesting for me. I like the idea that it changes, because it's just seeing the same. I get that with orchestral music. It's pretty much the same piece over and over again. This has a life, and I was not I thought, you know, I mean, I did a certain type of opera, of Broadway. I'm not so keen on certain type of singers, but all the ones we got here are fabulous. I mean, I really think they're amazing.
I agree. I mean, I think they've been a sort of eye-opener for all of us, this pleasure of working with a mixture of opera singers and Broadway singers.
But also they can sing my notes as well. I mean, it's not Zanarkis, it's not Stockhausen, but the fact they can do that and sound natural is you know, it's proof really.
I bet they could do Zanarkis.
Yeah, they probably could, but yeah, they could. But I mean, it's just the style. I hope it doesn't grate.
They're powerful. They're just powerful voices. I think it was lucky as well. It really did mix well, and that was a kind of, I think, a happy accident or a minor risk. But I was surprised at how brilliantly it worked together. But then I think that's because your music as well. You sort of, Mark, is great. It's not like just, you know, you say you use jazz. It's not like here's an orchestra and a little, you know, little combo going. It's actually the harmonic universe is very kind of lush and beautiful.
Thank you.
You've got another piece coming on in New York very shortly, haven't you?
Sadly, I've got to go back before I come back again, so I've got to fly. But I've got a piece of the New York Phil called Freeze.
This is a really big deal, because this was on the first night of the proms. It was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
No, it wasn't the first night, but it was played at the proms. Yeah.
But one of the real big promenade concerts in London was Beethoven's Ninth and this new Mark piece, both of them commissioned by the Royal Philharmonic Society. They famously commissioned Beethoven to write his Ninth Symphony. They gave him £50 for it. I hope they paid you more than £50.
They did, but it was a bit intimidating to be with that piece. But, you know, it was really
you're
fantastic.
A real Beethoven fan.
I'm a huge Beethoven fan. Yeah, huge. So it's really nice to come back and I've worked with the New York Phil a few times, but I've never worked with Alan Gilbert. So it'll be. I'm going to be here back in 2 weeks. So after tomorrow.
That's tremendous.
Well, I hope you guys will all join me in thanking all of the classes.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you all so much.